am a wife and a mother and an insurance agency owner, a friend, and a PTA advocate. I am so excited to talk about all of the things that I find most precious here within our community, within our lives, and within our faith, friendships, and relationships. Here on Heather's Most Precious. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Heather's Most Precious. I am the most excited about this episode as y'all get to hear from one of my very favorite authors who has written the book, The Opportunity, which we will get to dive into today a little bit to introduce to most of you what this amazing book has done for many people, including me. And we've got Joel Ackerman here. Joel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, I'm excited about it.
That is perfect. Now, Joel, I know I've mentioned you are an author. Tell us kind of who you are.
Well, I'm an author. I'm a writer, director. I sing. I was a stand-up comedian. I'm an actor. I'm a poet. I'm a father, and I'm a brother. I have 8 siblings, so I come from a very big family. And growing up with a big family, being entertaining was very important because that's how you got attention, right? That's how you got noticed and got love was by, actually it's not very healthy. I've learned through therapy, it's not very healthy. It was the reality of our situation. And so being creative and trying to say interesting things and do interesting things was how we got attention, which was how we felt love. Again, I don't recommend this because it's not a healthy way to live, but that was the reality of my childhood. It was a great childhood. I didn't know how bad it screwed me up until years later.
None of us do.
Right, but I enjoyed it, and it's given me the career that I have in the creative space, doing all kinds of books, film, all kinds of things.
Did you know from an early age that you were kind of a creative, that you were going to be able to utilize your creative kind of instincts through a varied?
Yes, so before I started school, before kindergarten. My dad was a marketing consultant, a marketing coach, he would help businesses get more customers who would pay them more money more often, which was his slogan. And, but he was a writer, right? He had to write for that. And I saw him typing one night on the computer in his office. And I was immediately like, oh, that's how books and things are made. Is someone writes it from their brain and it goes through their fingers on the keyboard to the screen, and then it gets disseminated from there. So from then on, I knew I wanted to be a writer, which is so rare. I've found out since through friends and even my own kids. Most people don't know what they want to do until they're much, much older. And I've known since I was 4 years old that I wanted to be a writer, and I've loved writing ever since. I would sit in my dad's lap and dictate to him what I wanted the words to say. And I wrote my first books.
Oh, wow.
Before I was in, first grade that way.
That is fantastic. And what a special time. I know you mentioned growing up in a large family and having to kind of be the family clown to get some attention, being loud and vibrant. But how neat for you and your daddy to have, sorry, I'm Southern, your father, to have that time together where he got to explore that with you.
Yeah, no, it's great. And, I'm sure there's a lot of, I've done some extensive therapy in the last couple of years. And, it's interesting. I can count probably on one hand the number of times I did something with my dad individually, one-on-one.
Okay.
So very rare, and my kids, I get to do things with them all the time, one-on-one. Still, I'd like to do more, but compared to what I got, it's just night and day difference. But but it is, my dad has passed on not only love for writing, my love of baseball and America probably could be attributed a lot to him as well. So there's a great influence. People love their parents no matter what. It's amazing, right? And my parents were great. They weren't like abusive or anything, but even in situations where that's the case, it's amazing. People tend to kids love their parents.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is. I owe a lot to who I am to my dad.
I love that. I love that he was such an integral influence in your life. And you and I both come from homes that overall were fantastic. And my parents are two of my very best friends. And You're right. There is such a deep connection. And it's such a beautiful thing to have that. And then, of course, when you become a parent, you want that same relationship. You want a relationship that is strong and where they want to have that bond with you.
Yes. And the other big thing that to my dad's credit, that I've since learned a lot of parents don't do, even people I know closely don't do this for their kids. And I'm trying to do it for my kids, but it's hard. And I'm amazed that my parents were able to do it, which was, tell people that the American dream is real and that whatever you put your mind to, you can accomplish. And, I've learned you don't really need to say within reason, because kids kind of know what's within reason. Like I knew quickly that I would never be in the NBA. Not that I wanted to, but I knew I want to do that. That's not going to happen based on my skills, right? And size and everything else. But you don't need to say that to kids because they can figure out, all right, that's probably a bridge too far for me, but you don't want to limit it any more than they're going to figure out themselves.
Right.
And so anyway, they did that. They said, and so why that was so great for me was when my friends were going to college or making life choices, and they would start to hedge, they would go, well, I'd like to make movies, but is that really realistic? How many people get to make movies for a living? And so what they do is they study something else or don't really pursue it. And then of course it doesn't happen because they don't take the chance. Where I rolled that dice and I've been able to do it. I mean, I'm not famous. I'm not Steven Spielberg, but I'm able to do what I want to do with my day and with my time. And I can pursue film or music or books or whatever. And it's because my parents said, look, whatever you want to do, you can do it.
I think that's so big. And I think today in society, when I was growing up, it was one of those, the society says, if you don't go to college, if you don't do this, if you don't do that. And for me, I was much more creative. And so I think it's so important now to stress to your kids that there is a path that you can take, right? But it has to be where your interests lie. You can go to college if you want that. You can play sports. You can go to do your creative, right? Focus on that. But I think that so often there are families and parents that put this pressure on children. Because think about, even when we graduate high school, you're 17, 18 years old, that there's so much more to life. And I have talked to more and more people who were raised in households where they went to go be a doctor because that's what was expected of them instead of what they wanted. And then either you get stuck in it too long or you've waited so much more to take the other leap to do what you actually want to do. So I love that you're parenting in a way or trying to implement that to really build your kids up. Because I think that's, it's so important. And also, right, shaping their character by letting them know that they can be and do, and that you are going to love them through any of that, right? That you're there to help them as they take those chances and those steps and help craft kind of their interests. I think that's amazing. Now, how many children do you have?
I have 4 kids. I have 3 boys and a girl.
That's awesome. Now, what ages do you have?
The range is from 4 to 12, and the 4-year-old will turn 5 here in a couple of months. So, 4, 7, 10, and 12.
I love that. And I love that they're relatively close in age. I think that's
they're each about 2.5, 3 years apart.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, having 4, do you feel like some of your kids have closer relationships or bonds? Or do you feel like everybody just is happy family all the time?
Well, I mean, obviously, happy family all the time is a fantasy, but I'm close with all of them. There's one who's a little bit more of a mama's boy, and so he and I butt heads a little bit more than the others, I would say for sure. And the oldest, has the curse of all oldest, which is, a lot is expected of them. I know, I can sense that I put a lot of pressure on him to set a good examples, to start out the kids on the right path and all that. So, like many families, they bicker and they argue and it drives us crazy and, whatever. I always say moms are the best because kids are the worst.
Yeah.
But, I'm joking. I love my kids, but, family is hard. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do.
Absolutely.
So it's not all candy and roses.
No, it's not. But I'll tell you, there's such reward in seeing kind of the best parts. My boys are 15 and 10, and I have always said like they are the best parts of me. It's neat to see that. It's also really hard to see the parts of yourself that you don't like that then show back up. But I think that it's truly a beautiful gift. And you're right. So difficult. How do you find the balance between fatherhood and being able to be creative in all of the myriad of things that you are in as far as writing and singing and directing?
Well, it's not easy. And I don't know that I have found the balance, I guess, to answer your question. I guess we'll know that when my kids are grown and we'll see how screwed up they are and we'll see if I was able to find the balance or not. But I think a couple of things. Number one of the things that I've discovered in therapy is that, people talk about love languages. Mm-hmm. And my love language is the same that my parents gave to me. Again, there wasn't a lot of time or attention, but there were occasional words of affirmation. And so, they would tell me that they loved me. They would compliment me if I did something well. And we were a very verbal family. And then we also were physically affectionate, hugs and those kind of things. So that's the way I love now, which is, I used to have a lot of guilt that I wasn't a quality time guy. Now that's not, again, compared to my parents, I've done much better at spending quality time. I take my kids camping, we'll go out to eat, or we'll do little dates or whatever. So I do spend a lot more time than my parents were able to spend with me. But generally, I'm not a quality time guy. And I used to have a lot of guilt about that. But through therapy, one method of love is not better than another. They're just different. The best case scenario is that you get love in all the ways, because then there's just more expressions of love. Mm-hmm. But so what I do to try and find that balance is where possible, I try to involve my kids in my work. So for instance, I filmed a TV pilot in Pennsylvania in January, and I took my son, who was 12, because he was old enough, on the trip scouting locations. So we got to see like the second biggest house in America while we were there, some old places, and it was a great experience to be with him and allow him to be around adults who are working in a creative setting and things like that. And then we're working on my son again, and I are working on a book together where he's kind of overseeing and working with me on choosing the illustrator and and picking the book and those kind of things. And then the biggest thing that I do, and I always feel is most important, mm-hmm. is I try to put them to bed every night, where I actually have one-on-one time with each kid. I lay down next to them. I snuggle with them a little. Sometimes we say prayers together, and it can be ever so brief. It can be just a couple of minutes, but I get to say, hey, is there anything you want to talk to me about? Or I might ask them some questions, and I tell them I love them. And that daily, knowing for them going to bed each night, knowing, okay, my dad loves me, even if he got mad at me today, or even if whatever, it's, I think it's really, that's the best thing I can do.
Absolutely. That continued communication is so, so important. Because when we look at relationships, right, miscommunication is the underlying thing. And I think as kids, they are so much more forgiving than I think sometimes we give them credit for, but them having that touch with you, that time with you, so that they know and that you're opening that door to say, hey, did something happen today that you would want me to know? And we typically do with our kids a high and a low. Like, what was your high of the day? What was the low of the day? And kind of celebrate those things because it's part of life, right? And the earlier we now know as adults, but the earlier we kind of explore those together, we're going to have great days where everything hits the right way. And then we're going to have days where it looks like the whole day was bad, but it wasn't. We had a bad class, or we had a bad friend play date on the playground, but it wasn't a bad day. And so just trying to explore those. So I love that you've been able to do that. I think you hit something very, very truthfully, kind of at the beginning when you said that there really is no balance. You still haven't found that. And I think that there's so much truth in that. There's not ever a great balance. I think as adults, it feels like we're really always spread thin when you're trying to parent and career and all of the things and do them all really, really well. I'm sure you feel that kind of that pull as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, if I go out of town, right now I'm in a play, which I haven't done since I was in 6th grade. So I'm rehearsing five nights a week. And so at least with my youngest, I don't get to put him to bed, but you do the best you can, and you just do the best you can, and realize that no matter what you do and no matter how much effort you put in, something you do is because you are deficient. Somewhere there's a deficiency in your parenting, and you can't beat yourself up about that. Your parents had deficiencies. They passed those on to you. You try and improve as best you can, but you're going to pass on other things to your kids, and you do the best you can, I think.
Yes. And that deficiency is where we can see Christ come in to help and to give that strength and that courage that only he can give, right? Because if we were perfect in every aspect, we wouldn't have a need. I often think about that,
Yeah, exactly.
I would love to talk with you about kind of you are an author, not kind of, you are an author. And I would love to speak about first the book that you wrote. And I know you've written other books, but my very favorite, The Opportunity. Again, for our listeners, I'm showing you the book. I will put it in the show notes, and I will also include pictures, but a very, very special book. But before I dive into kind of my experience, how I found it, and how Joel and I initially connected, Joel, how did this idea come to you?
I don't exactly remember the circumstances, except that it felt out of the blue. As I recall, it was the first lines of the poem that came to me, and I don't know why they came to me. Again, writers work by inspiration. This inspiration was as close to what I would describe as revelation as anything that I've ever written, probably. It just felt like it came to me. The words that open the story, which is written in verse, are, "A boy in a tree looked out to the sea." And, you see, okay, there's a boy in a tree and he's looking out to the sea. So immediately there's the words that came to me and the image. And it kind of, not all the words, but the story flowed from that. Like, okay, what's he looking out to the sea for? And again, it just came like inspiration or even revelation, like he's waiting for a ship to come and pick him up and take him away. So it's kind of an archetypal story, right? We have, I didn't even think about a lot of these things until I was writing the poem. but we have sayings about this, right? I'm waiting for my ship to come in, those kind of things. But the name of the ship, basically, I wrote out the just in, prose, just kind of like an outline of what happens in the book. And over the next few weeks, I would come home from my day job and I would go up to my parents' upstairs bedroom, at my parents' house. I had just got home from being an itinerant preacher in the Midwest where I was traveling around. And I wrote this story and it came to me, and it was one of the great experiences of my life, one of my favorite writing experiences, and still probably the favorite thing I've ever written.
I love that. I would agree. It's my favorite thing. How long of a process from the time that you first started to the time you actually were able to put kind of pen to paper to get that process finished?
So it wasn't very long. It was in a very productive part of my life because it was before I was married. So I was 21 years old, 22 years old. I was only taking a couple of classes at college. I wasn't going full time to college. And I was working only part time. So I was being very productive and diligent. I would say maybe a month from the time that I first. Now, I will say I've since discovered that it's possible that I had the idea for the poem and the story before I went and did my 2 years of itinerant preaching. And then came home and it kind of like, I decided to like, okay, now I'm going to write this thing. But regardless, by the time I like sat down and started working on it, it was maybe 3 to 4 weeks, and I had finished the first draft. And then I made minor changes and additions. From there, I started sharing it at poetry readings and things like that. And people started going, "Oh, wow, this is crazy." I had a brother who read it.
Oh, wow.
And decided to change the course of his life, and pursue a dream that he had thought it's not realistic, it's not logical, it's not responsible. But then when he read the opportunity, he was like, "Okay, I'm moving to Chicago. I'm gonna do my thing." And people just started like sharing it around. So I knew I had something at that point. But it wasn't until years later, over a decade later, that I turned it into a book.
Yes. And then you also got an illustrator at that point?
Yeah. So I started looking for an illustrator. So I wrote it, I think, in probably 2006 or 2007. And then I started looking for an illustrator probably after college, like 2010, probably. Maybe I was even in college. I don't remember. But I had multiple illustrators fall through. They were flaky. I didn't have a lot of money as a struggling writer, college student.
Right.
So I couldn't drop a lot of money on Illustrator, but I didn't want a junky illustrator.
Right.
Most amateur picture books have lousy illustrators, and I wasn't going to do that. So I was really looking for, a good illustrator who I could afford. So that made it difficult. And I sent the book to be published. I sent it to other publishers and illustrators, and I had great feedback where they said, "This is a really beautiful book. Unfortunately, we don't know how we would sell this book because it's a picture book that's really for adults." It's longer than a typical picture book. Vocabulary is way more advanced than like the typical elementary school student. So they didn't know what to do with it. And I got busy with my film and commercial writing and directing career. And so it just kind of kept falling to the back burner until eventually it was like, God was like, "Hey, you need to do something with this book. There's people who need this book." Basically my career, I had my best year ever in 2017. And then suddenly it was like someone turned off the faucet, nothing. No, everyone stopped calling. Everyone stopped, the people who did call weren't, signing deals. And so suddenly had a lot of time and a lack of income. And I was like, okay, I better get this book going. There's more to the story than that, actually. But I don't know. I want to try and be brief. But anyway, that precipitated us finding the author or the illustrator. And the illustrator, she said, oh yeah, I can't, you can't afford me, basically. And I said, well, can I send you the book anyway? Just take a look. And I sent it to her, and she said, oh wow, I really love this. Little, for much less money than I deserve. And I said, you're right. You do deserve money. That's all I have.
Okay.
And so anyway, that's a story. And we finally, in 2019, we got it published. And, I started my publishing company, which I still own, and we're going to be publishing several other books next year. And,
that's great.
Yeah.
I love that. So much to unpack here. I love that it was a gift that continued to give, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it didn't for many years. It had given to people here and there, and I had brothers share with church groups or whatever, so they would kind of share it with people. But the irony of the story is that. And you'll know this if you read the book, and I don't want to give it too much away, but I was guilty of the same mistake that the boy in the poem makes, that it now has been the gift that keeps on giving for years now. But for years, I was guilty of delaying and hesitating and getting distracted and all the things that the boy does in the story.
Absolutely. And I think that for me is why it was so pivotal. I think anybody can relate to this book in some form or fashion. And it was, I saw a Facebook ad for it. And it was one of the ads where you have several different people reading pieces of it. And there are people getting emotional. There are people saying this is like a must read. And at that point, I had never been propelled or influenced to purchase anything off of the internet, and was so moved in that moment, probably because at that point I was like, you know what? I'm really good at crying. I like to do that too. Let's do it together. And when I read the book, I remember I love poetry, and I also love to write. And the way that the entire book is written in a very poetic way was normally, right, we're used to poems being a page, not an entire book. Right. And it was so different from anything. And then, of course, you have this underlying story that is so heartfelt, because you can really, it just resonates in a different way. Then you have the illustrations, which are beautiful, but they do not overtake the writing. And I think so often you have either beautiful illustrations in books that it's because the words are not enough that they need something else, or they kind of compete with each other. And the flow between them is, it really is just, it's beautiful. And I would encourage every person to read this. But for me, this book called The Opportunity, and it propelled me to open our insurance agency. It propelled me to step out of the confines. I had already missed an opportunity, at one point in my life. And throughout this book, the beautiful nuances that you'll see and just within the stories helped me to, it kind of really did propel me to open our own small business. And it's just a beautiful thing. It really is.
Well, first of all, thank you for the high praise about the book. But some of the credit has to fall on your shoulders or God for opening your heart to receive it that way, because not everyone does, right? There are some people who either don't get it which is fine, right? Not every book's going to touch everyone the same
Right.
way. And that is totally understandable. It's expected, right? It's not even surprising. It's expected. Not everyone, but it does surprise me sometimes. It's that there are people who don't get it, but more importantly, you received the message, but then you acted on it, which is only you can take credit for that. You made a choice. You decided to change something, to do something. And there are other people. This is the experience of the opportunity. Is it motivates people. And I be sure to actually use the word motivate more than inspiring, because inspiring sometimes kind of has a connotation of making people feel good, like, oh, they feel upbeat. The opportunity might not, for some people, it might not make you feel good, but what it will do is it will motivate you, if, like you did, Heather, if you let it, if you kind of go, oh, wow, yeah, this is something that I should think about. And you did that. You allowed it to motivate you. And thank you for sharing that. And I love hearing the stories about, and you're one of many that I've heard of people either starting a business, changing a career, getting married, or going on dates, like doing something that they have been hesitating to do. Finally, it's just a little nudge, the opportunity is just a little push in that direction.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I mean, it was definitely a resource that God used during a season when I think other things were trying and maybe I was not seeing as clearly, but who knew, right? That a book would, and no discredit here, but that a book would help be such a huge resource in yes, answering a calling that had been placed. And I think, as you've mentioned, for other people, a very influential resource, especially for people that, I mean, it sounds like a lot of people making life changes, which is a big piece of what this book is about. And so I would encourage anyone, again, we will definitely put a link to where you can order this in the show notes, but it is something that after I read it, the very first thing I did was call my parents, and anyone who called, I was like, wait, do you have like 15 minutes? I need to read you a book. And then, of course, nobody wanted to talk to me. They're like, don't call Heather. She's going to read to you. But it was...
It's almost, it takes at least 10 minutes to read. And to believe you would read the whole thing.
But it was hilarious. So, and of course, I'm crying and I'm doing, but it just, that is how much it touched me and kind of rocked my world in the best possible way. And you're right. I love that you mentioned there's a difference between inspirational and motivational. There's a big difference there, because you're right. This isn't something that's necessarily going to make you feel the best, but I just pray that people will read it with a willing heart to hear what the actual message is.
Yeah. And you brought up the video with the people. I wanted to touch on that. What I did, obviously I'm in video, but before I ever made a video, what I did is I sent it to people who were people I'd met through work. So they weren't close friends or family, because close friends and family, their job is to tell you, oh, this is great. This is great. So I didn't want that. I wanted, like, okay, what is a person who's, just they know me, because you have to have a connection to be able to send it to them. But what are they going to say? They don't know me personally. So I send them a PDF of the book, and I said, read the book. It'll take you 10 minutes. Read the book, then turn on your cell phone and record your reaction.
Oh, wow. And
I sent it to a few people who I'd worked with in the commercial space, actors, and I just said, read this, turn on the thing, and record your reaction. And a couple of people, 2 or 3 people, were actually crying. There were a few people who were teary-eyed. There were some men, you talked about the writing. One guy who described it as a call to adventure, and he described it as the verbiage the words as kind of like Dr. Seuss meets Shakespeare, which I thought was really but like when I got back those videos and they weren't just like, yeah, good book, I really enjoyed it, but they were actually like, whoa, 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 and one of the women was like sobbing, and she wasn't even an actress. She was a business owner, entrepreneur. And so I realized, okay, I've got something here. And that's when I came up with the idea of let's bring in a bunch of strangers. So the video you saw was a bunch of strangers coming in. We gave them the book and asked them to read it. And then we just filmed their reactions. So that's the video that you saw.
And I think that's a brilliant way because, again, you can say your book is good all day long, right? Same way with anybody. You can say that you're the best, but it's hearing other people that you actually...
I'm not saying I'm the best. You want the best, go to Mark Twain, go to, I could give you a list of the best. Yeah. I'm not that. But this can be a nice contribution to someone's life.
Oh, no, it absolutely can. And I think it is a book I have shared with so many people and plan to continue just because of the message. And I hope that you will continue to write more and more in this way. I don't know, are all of the book styles that you write similar to this?
No, not at all. In fact, I write a wide variety of things. The next book that I have coming out is a picture book that is very much like kids will. I mean, by the way, kids, I got a message from a woman about the opportunity that said her 3-year-old loves to hear this book. And they couldn't even say the opportunity right? They love to be read this book. So there's stories like that, but it's certainly written for an audience of like, I would say at least middle school, high school, college age, and adults. The next book is a true, typical book. It's an animal story. It's not written in verse, so it's not poetry. It still is, in my mind, more intended for an older audience, but you could read it, kids love it. My 4-year-old loves it, and but it really is a story about love partners.
Oh, wow.
So it's it's a romantic book. It's a book that I hope people will give to their significant other to say like, hey, I appreciate you. And this, and this is how I love. So it's it's a parable about how it is frequently good to find people who have strengths different than your strengths. So it's kind of a fable. And then I've got a book, but then I've got a book that's, it's a comedy novella that's about Oedipus and him getting back into the dating world after his, mother, who he unknowingly married and bedded, has killed herself in battle, essentially. And so it's a comedic adaptation of the Oedipus myth. So completely different from everything else. So, and then the film and TV I write tends to be kind of historical drama. And so it runs the gamut of all kinds of things, and the poetry too.
Absolutely. Now, bringing in kind of the film, which I love that even in writing, you're able to creatively express just a myriad, right? I mean, you're talking about anything from kids' books to more of the poetry, which I know you called, in verse, and then going to more comedy, sketch, satirical, that kind of thing. Now, what are you with one specific production, or do you do kind of direct for various companies?
Yeah, so I own a creative agency called Ackermania Creative. You can't find us online. Don't look. But yeah, we do commercials, and then when I do a film project, each one of those film productions, we form like its own company for that production. So we're in the process of developing a TV show that's got its own company. If I do another film, that'll be its own company. And then I also do development for Angel Studios, who did like The Chosen. They distributed The Chosen, and they did Sound of Freedom. So I do development for them as well.
Very good.
So yeah, lots of film and lots of writing work in different capacities.
I love that. So with Angel Studio, when you talk about kind of your role with them, what does that look like?
So I did a podcast with them, but now I'm mostly doing, although we're prepping for a season 2 of the podcast, which I hope happens, but I do development for them, what that means is I'll read scripts that come in that they're considering doing or that have been greenlit, and I give feedback on those scripts to say, this is why this script is terrible and you shouldn't make or put any money into this project. Or if the project's already greenlit, I say, here's how you can make the script better. That kind of thing.
That's great. Okay. So more of the editorial type on that side, giving that feedback. I think that's
it's help develop. But yes, it's essentially improving the projects or deciding which projects are worth doing. Yeah. That's
great. And again, you now get to see almost every piece of production with being on that side, also writing, also directing. That has to feel really rewarding.
No, not every side is rewarding. I don't like editing.
Okay.
No. Okay. But and when you're reading bad scripts, it can be a nightmare. But yes, you're right. But it's true. It's true. Even reading bad scripts, it makes you a better writer because you get a lot of practicing dissecting. Okay, why is this bad? Most people can't pinpoint what makes this movie great or this movie terrible. They just know, I like this movie way more and I like the story more and whatever. But if you say, well, why does this story not work? They would go, I don't know, stupid. Well, that's not exactly an answer. Why is it stupid? Why doesn't it suck you in? Why doesn't it make you care the way these other stories do? So that's what I get to figure out all the time.
Yes. And how neat to be able to get to that level, though, because you're right. I don't know that I could tell you why. I mean, I could say simple things like it's bad acting, or I don't like the video moves like you're in a home film instead of being a film. So right. I say that, but would not be able to dissect it to the degree that you're able to, which then you're right, you would be able to apply in other areas. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I love that. Now, do you have a favorite out of all of the hats that you wear in the career, kind of in the industry that you're in? Do you have a favorite piece that just really motivates you to keep going? Is where you find kind of your hope for the future in?
I feel best when I've written. Directing has the most high because when you're directing, it's kind of like being king. It's the closest thing that Americans can probably experience being king. And I've never, because everyone is there to please you and they're all working towards your vision. And so there's a big high that comes with directing. It's an adrenaline rush. The day is crazy and it's very fun in that way. But it's superficial, right? At the end of the day, everyone goes home and you just feel like, wait, you were all my friends? You just were doing this because it was a job? So there's a big letdown after directing. It's a big high, but then there's a big letdown. Writing is the most satisfying because that's the moment of true creation. That's the moment before anything's written, nothing can be directed. It's the moment of taking inspiration and turning it into something that exists in the world. And it's the most work by far. But it's the most satisfying at the end because it's also the editing similar to that because it's a ton of work. But it's more tedious, it's less exciting, and it's more disappointing because that's where your dreams come to like finality, and they're never, ever as good as you wanted them to be, right? So writing is the most satisfying because it's got all the best stuff. It's like most possibilities. It's got the most, it's got actual work involved. It's got, but so I think writing. And then the other thing that I would say is I love singing. I love singing. I'm not a great singer, but I did it, my stand-up routine, and I'm acting in this play, and I convinced the writer and director to work a song into the play. And my enjoyment of the acting experience, just knowing I get to sing one song in the show every night, went from it just increased by 5 times.
Yeah. I love that. Have you always enjoyed that?
So I love singing for no good reason.
No? That is awesome. People who are out there and they're writing and it's part of their dream, what are kind of the next steps that you would tell them? Is there a certain way that they would write, or maybe so maybe for the person who's just now starting to write, any advice? And then maybe for someone who has material written and maybe wants to take it to the next step.
Person who's just starting writing, I would say keep writing. Just write. Don't try to make it good. Just keep writing. And if you can't motivate yourself to write, well, if there's a shortage of ideas, maybe you shouldn't be a writer. Because I feel like that should never be a problem. If you're like, what should I write about? Then you're probably not a writer. Do something else. But if you have thoughts and you have ideas, then just write them. Don't worry about making them good. First draft is rarely good. And just write. I don't know what else to say there. In terms of if you have stuff done and you wanting to take it to the world, maybe I would say share it with people like I did. Share it with friends and family too. That can be good for motivation just because they'll hopefully encourage you. Be prepared that a lot of them won't, especially if it's long. I have people send me stuff, and if it's long, it's just really, and especially if it's not very good, they may not read it. And if they don't, if people don't read it and they don't get back to you, you've got one of two problems. Either you've got something that's not very good, and therefore you need to rework it from the beginning, because if they started reading it, and didn't finish and never got back to you, then it's probably a problem in the beginning. You didn't hook them well enough in the beginning, right? The beginning is the most important because they're never going to finish it if they don't get through the beginning. And then the other problem you could have, and you have to figure out which problem you have, is you just have people who are, not readers and they're flakes, so you got to make sure to give your stuff to someone who will read it eventually and hopefully give you honest feedback and say, this is no good for this reason. That's what you want to get.
Okay.
And then if you do have something that's really good, you'll know because you'll send it out to people and they'll say, wow, this is really good. And then just keep sharing it with people. In terms of getting it published, you can submit to Print Immortal. If you go to my website, you can go to printimmortal.com, and there's a way you can message me and tell me about a book or whatever you have that you would like us to consider publishing. That's really easy for us because, we don't get a ton of submissions. Most publishers, you can't do that. You have to get an agent, and to get an agent, you got to write query letters, and it's a whole process. And I've never gone through it because I started my own publishing company. And so I don't really know what to tell you. But, I would say self-publish is what I would say. If you can't get a publisher to look at you, self-publish, and there's a million ways to do it. Amazon has a great way for people to do it. And yeah, that's what I would say.
That's awesome. I think that it's so important for people to kind of, hey, here's the advice, or here's from someone in this position. This is what the next step could be for you. Not that you're promising anything, but just at least giving them an idea. Now, you mentioned kind of early on being younger, your dad being able to transcribe some of your feelings and emotions and ideas. If there is a parent that sees their child has an incredible imagination, and, how are they, if they are not in the same position that your father was, how would you advise for the parent to help kind of foster that skill into their child and help them develop that?
I don't know that I have a good answer. The truth of the matter is I've got 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have any who are currently interested in writing, and I haven't pushed them in that, just like I haven't pushed them in any other thing. I've encouraged it when they've done it, but I don't want to impose my interests on them. So I don't really know. If you do have a child who is super into writing,
Mm-hmm.
I think the best advice would be don't critique their writing too much. The thing they need when they're starting out is not critique. They need time doing it. So just encourage them. Just tell it. They will get to a point, at least this is me just kind of judging from my own experience. If they will ever succeed at it, and they get serious enough about it to where it's something that they could do professionally, then they will get to a point where they realize, I want to get better at this than I currently am. And that's at the point when they're ready for critique. They'll probably start reading books about how to, be a better writer or whatever. And that's the point at which then if you do have critiques of them, you could start introducing that. But I would say if you're dealing with a child who has an interest in writing, just tell them to write and just give them positive feedback. Love everything they write. You don't have to fake love it, but say the things that you like about it, right? You don't have to tell them something's good that's not good, but you find something good. Oh my gosh, you came up with that all by yourself, even if it's not, great or whatever. The biggest thing that, like anything else, the biggest thing that will make someone good at it is time spent doing it. So you just want to encourage them to do it as much as possible. And probably being really positive about their writing will encourage them to do it more than you saying, it kind of made me bored by the middle or whatever.
No, I think that's huge. I think you're right. There is something precious about practicing, not just making it perfect, but helping you, right? The more you do it, the more that you become better. You have this opportunity to grow. And I think as parents, we do become overly critical. And I think some of that is, past we talked about things that we may be dealing with from therapy from younger, but I think just encouraging your child to sit down and do it and making it fun by encouraging them, I think that's huge. But you're right, just giving them that time and space to practice and let them figure it out from there. But I think so many kids have this imagination. I know my youngest does, that could allow them to do that. But so often we're like, well, wait, hang on, that's not a paragraph or that's not. So I think even the instruction
the last thing you want to talk about is punctuation, spelling, formatting. That's the last thing you want to talk about. That again will be the kid later will come to like, oh, I need to get better at that. But the most important thing is, can they say something interesting? Mm-hmm. So the example I always give with this is, and I'm sure we'll get all kinds of nasty replies from people who disagree with my assessment, but I'm going to give you my assessment. JK, I don't even know how to say her last name. JK Rowling, I don't care really. She wrote Harry Potter, okay? In my opinion, her prose it's not bad, it's average, right? It's like there's a million authors who write worse prose than her. But I don't think she's a great prose writer. She doesn't hold a candle to some of the great authors in the past who just write beautiful prose and you love every way they write, right? But it doesn't matter because she told a fantastic story, right? So it was the story itself the ideas in the story, the characters in the story, what happens in the story, the meaning of the story. That's what matters. And then the way she told it, that's first of all, spelling and punctuation. That's what editors are for. But even the quality of writing, like, don't focus so much on like that until you've got something to say. Because the way you say it is much less important than what you say. And so the fact that, she's the most successful author, one of the most successful authors in history, arguably, right?
Uh-huh.
It has nothing to do with her ability to write well, in the sense of like her verbiage is so beautiful, and the way her sentences and a lot of her descriptions are like kind of unimpressive in compared to other authors. But her story is so completely fantastic and captures the imagination and is relatable, and all the, everything else you want in a story, all the most important stuff in a story, she nailed. So the fact that her prose is just average,
didn't matter.
Everyone forgets, everyone overlooks it. Who cares? Because she told a great story. And, I could point to the Bible that way, right? Like the Bible, is not, it's not a page turner, unless you're like spiritually connected to it. It's not a page turner. It's not going to suck you in, but the stories have been told and retold and reinvented and adapted. And it's because the ideas in the stories are so good and strong that even though the prose is sparse and difficult to get through and some, it lacks a lot in a lot of places. And I'm speaking generally, there's some parts of the Bible just fantastic. But because the ideas are what matter most, what you say is way more important than how you say it.
Right.
That's another thing to remember, is you have to have something to say. So if you don't have interesting thoughts and interesting story, how you say it means very little.
Absolutely. No, there's so much truth there. Well, I have loved getting to speak with you, Joel, just about not only the hats that you wear, about family life and kind of what motivates you, and even the advice that you've given to our listeners today about kind of following their dreams and writing and what that looks like. And I would love to know, kind of in closing, what do you, Joel Ackerman, what do you find most precious?
F's. And we talk about this in the family. The 5 F's are all free to everyone, but not everyone has them. And that's why, like, if you're very rich, if you have these 5 F's, and they're faith, freedom, right? And there's not everyone has faith and not everyone has freedom in the world. So those are 2 big ones. Family. There's a lot of people who don't have family. Friends. There's a lot of people who don't have friends. And fun is the last one. To have a splash of fun amongst all of that. If you have those 5 F's, you really are rich, and those are the most precious and most valuable things you could have, I would say. It's those 5 things. They just randomly happen to all start with F. And then, of course, if you add in food, if you really have everything you need, right there. So yeah, those are the things that I would call most precious.
And I love that you've mentioned things that are also free, right? For the most part.
Yes, and that's to them for the most part. I mean, there are people in the world who do not have freedom, and that's the thing that eludes them of those things. There are people who want faith but can't seem to muster it, and I don't even know what to tell those people. But for the most part, those things are available to all of us. But, there are some people who want family and they never get that opportunity and that kind of thing. And they're the family that they came from passed on. So, we really do. If we look at those most important things and we find, oh, wow, I do have all of those things, even though I hate the house I live in and, my job sucks or whatever. Like those 5 things, I think really do make us the most satisfied with life if we have those 5 things.
Absolutely. I love
food.
Yes, and food. I love that you covered those.
You have to have it to live. So
of course. I love that. I love that you shared those. So faith, freedom, family, friends, fun, and food. The 6 F's.
So if you want to throw food in there.
That is perfect. Well, Joel, thank you again for spending time with us. And for those listening, I hope that you have found some encouragement and some advice as he has shared for new writers and trying to find what we know is not balance, but more of ways to connect with our family, the people that we love most, and ways to encourage your young writer, or maybe even you, if that is, if you are the one that has that creative ability. But whatever you are going through today, I hope that you will choose to be kind, choose to be grateful, and choose to encourage. And we'll see you back next week for another episode of Heather's Most Precious. Bye, y'all.
Heather's Most Precious is brought to you with love by the Hendrickson Agency, an insurance agency serving all of Georgia and Tennessee. The Hendrickson Agency, properly protecting your most precious possessions. Support for Heather's Most Precious is provided by Study.com, which offers SAT and ACT study materials and even has resources for AP and college credit courses. Listeners of Heather's Most Precious get 30% off their first 3 months of any subscription level with offer code PRECIOUS. Just go to Study.com and use offer code PRECIOUS at checkout. Heather's Most Precious is produced by Chattanooga Podcast Studios and is part of the Podnooga Network. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of Heather's Most Precious.